Today, we're talking about a guy from ancient Greece who pretty much invented history as we know it, Herodotus. But here's the thing about him. Was he a careful, fact-checking historian, or was he the ancient world's greatest collector of tall tales?
So, let's start with this idea. What if the very first history book ever written, the Histories, is less like a dusty old textbook and more like a cabinet of curiosities? You know, one of those collections filled with the bizarre, the epic, and some things that are just downright unbelievable. That's the tour we're about to take.
And look, this is the man himself telling us his mission. He's not saying, I'm going to tell you what's true. He's saying, I'm going to faithfully record what people told me. He basically traveled the known world with a notebook, listening to everyone's stories and writing it all down. And that commitment to recording everything is what makes his work so fascinating and, frankly, so wild.
All right, so let's kick off our tour with some of the craziest cultural practices he wrote about. And you might want to brace yourselves, because, well, the ancient world was a very, very strange place. First stop, Egypt. Herodotus gets there and his mind is just blown. From his Greek point of view, it seems like they do everything backwards. The women are out in the marketplace handling business, while the men are at home weaving. And get this, even the way they push the shuttle on the loom is the opposite of how everyone else does it. You can tell he's just captivated by this idea that there isn't just one right way for a society to work.
And things escalate quickly. We go from, battlefield rituals with the Scythians to some truly shocking traditions around death. He tells us the Macedonians honor their dead fathers by, mixing their flesh with mutton and having a feast. And the Massagettai, they believe the best, most honorable death for their elders is to sacrifice and eat them. And the amazing thing is, Herodotus just reports all this. No judgment, it's just another story from a vast and varied world.
But some of these customs he describes in incredible detail. Take the Babylonian marriage market. It's this whole organized system. Once a year, they'd gather all the young women who were ready to be married. The most beautiful were auctioned off to the richest men for a high price. And then, this is the wild part, that money was used to create dowries for the women who weren't considered as attractive, so they could be offered to poorer men who needed a wife. It's like an auction and a social welfare program all rolled into one. Just incredible.
Okay, so now let's shift gears. Herodotus wasn't just a collector of weird stories. He was the first person to try and chronicle the grand sweep of history, especially the massive conflict between the Greeks and the Persian Empire. This is where we see him on an epic scale.
And this story just perfectly shows his eye for the little things that change everything. The city of Sardis was thought to be unconquerable. It had this one side that was a sheer cliff face, so they didn't even bother guarding it. But then one Persian soldier happens to see a defender's helmet fall over the edge. He watches the guy climb down this supposedly impossible cliff to get it back, and in that moment he realizes it's not impossible at all. He leads a small group up that same path, and just like that, the city is taken. An entire empire falls because of a dropped helmet.
He also had this incredible eye for architecture. Just listen to his description of Ecbatana, the capital of the Medes. He talks about 7 concentric walls, each one painted a different color, representing the 7 planets. And the final 2 circles, the ones protecting the royal palace, they were coated in silver and gold. I mean, you can almost see it shimmering on the horizon. And the timescale he worked with, it's just staggering. He reports on the siege of this one city, Azotus, by an Egyptian pharaoh. And this siege didn't last for a few weeks or even a few months. It went on for 29 years. 29. At the time, that was the longest siege in all of recorded history.
Okay, so we've met Herodotus the anthropologist and Herodotus the military historian. Now it's time to meet my favorite version, Herodotus the cryptozoologist. Because this is where his work takes a hard right turn into pure fantasy.
Right? You'll be reading pages about troop movements and political treaties, and then he'll just casually drop in something like this. Oh, by the way, in a remote part of Libya, there are creatures with no heads, and they have their eyes in their chests. He's always careful to say, the Libyans declare this to be so, but he still puts it in there. For him, it's all part of the story of the world.
And oh, the menagerie doesn't stop there. He writes about giant ants in the Indian desert, ants the size of foxes that dig up gold dust when they burrow. He tells us about winged serpents that fly from Arabia to Egypt every single spring, where they're promptly eaten by ibis birds. I mean, his world is just teeming with not just different peoples, but with monsters and marvels.
So let me ask you one of the puzzles he presents. How on earth do you harvest cinnamon when it only grows in the nests of giant birds? Nests that are built on sheer, unclimbable cliffs? What do you do? Well, according to the story he heard, the solution is pure genius. You take these massive carcasses of oxen and leave them at the bottom of the cliffs. The giant birds fly down, grab these huge chunks of meat, and carry them back up to their nests. But the nests, which are just made of cinnamon sticks, can't handle the weight. They break, and the whole thing comes tumbling down to the ground. Then the Arabs just stroll over and pick up the cinnamon. Now, is it true? Almost certainly not. But is it an absolutely brilliant story? You bet it is.
So beyond strange customs and mythical beasts, Herodotus saw another, invisible force shaping everything: destiny. To him, the gods, dreams, oracles, prophecies, these weren't just footnotes. They were active players in the great drama of human history. And this is maybe one of the most powerful stories he tells. The Egyptian king, Psammenitis, has just lost his kingdom to the Persians. He's a captive, and he's forced to sit and watch as his own daughter is dressed in slave's clothes and paraded in front of him. The other Egyptian nobles are weeping, but the king, he just stares at the ground, silent.
A little while later, another group comes past. This time, it's his son, being led to his execution. Again, all the Egyptians around him are wailing, overcome with grief. But Psammenitis? Nothing. He doesn't move, doesn't shed a single tear.
And then a third man walks by, just an old man, one of the king's old friends from his court, who has lost everything and is now begging the soldiers for scraps. And at that sight, the sight of his old friend reduced to a beggar, the king finally shatters. He cries out, he weeps uncontrollably, he strikes his head in utter grief. So why then? Why did that finally break him? The Persian king is so stunned, he sends a messenger to ask. And Psammenitis gives this incredible answer. He says the tragedy of his own family, his daughter enslaved, his son killed, was a sorrow too immense for tears. It was an ocean of grief. But the fall of his friend, a man who went from wealth to begging in his old age, well, that was a human-sized tragedy, a grief he could comprehend. And that was something worth weeping for. It's just this profound insight into the psychology of loss.
So, after all these stories, the strange, the epic, the monstrous, the deeply human, what does it all add up to? I mean, why are we still talking about this book nearly 2,500 years later?
Well, it's because Herodotus was all of these things at once. He was the first real historian, trying to document a massive event like the Persian Wars. He was a pioneering anthropologist, completely fascinated by how different people lived. And let's be honest, he was a master storyteller who knew that a good story about gold-digging ants was just as important as a list of battle casualties.
But really, his single greatest innovation was this. He didn't just list what happened. He was the first person to consistently ask why. Why did these wars start? Why do these people live this way? In fact, the word history comes from the Greek word he used, historia, which means inquiry or to ask questions. He didn't just record the past. He invented the idea of investigating.
And that really leaves us with the final thought, doesn't it? In this amazing mix of fact and fable, Herodotus makes us ask a really fundamental question. Does a story have to be 100% verifiably true to tell us something true about the world? Maybe the real truth isn't just in the facts, but also in the stories we tell, the beliefs we hold, and even the monsters we imagine. Thanks for joining me for this one.